An independent developer on the Nintendo Switch recently discovered that they weren't getting the success they thought they would get on the Nintendo Switch.
Does this mean problems for Nindies in the future?
Who knows, but that sounds like a
Hot take!
Zeboyd Games, a developer of Cosmic Star Heroine, found themselves in a sticky situation where they released a game on the Switch and Nintendo basically said nothing about it. Now this is something we've seen from Nintendo very recently when it comes to the Nintendo Indie Directs, where they've been showing off a whole bunch of indie games being released on the platform. But for some reason, Nintendo avoided saying anything about this game, and the developers are rightly really upset. On other platforms like Steam or Xbox or PlayStation, you've got a whole bunch of game developers releasing games all the time, and there's just this huge crowd of just people making games really, really quickly. But on the Nintendo platform, the idea is, well, you don't have that much competition, and Nintendo is willing to work with you to shout out your game. This happening in this way has obviously made these guys upset, but does this mean that this is going to be the future for all games on the platform now?
Yeah.
Adam, what do you think?
So initially we did kind of think that there wouldn't be that much competition for independent developers on the Switch, but the numbers that we've seen have shown basically that there is a bunch of competition. And the folks from Zeboyd Games, we weren't going to see them necessarily, Nintendo necessarily announce anything from them at this Direct, because this Direct was focusing more on games that were coming out that day or later. But Cosmic Star Heroine, it came out earlier, I believe, in August on the Switch. Yeah. And it's a game that has been released on other platforms. So Zeboyd Games has basically said, like, look, our game came out on the Switch. We didn't hear anything from Nintendo. First of all, they had to jump through a bunch of hurdles to get their game on the Switch itself, and then after that, it was like basically nothing. And the developers of Cosmic Star Heroine were basically saying, "Hey, the least that we could have gotten from Nintendo is just a tweet saying that our game's out there right now, so that maybe our game sales would be bumped up a little bit." And they have seen less game sales on the Switch, which is debatable whether or not, like what the real issue is there. They sold about 2/3 as many games on the Switch as they did on the PS4 and PC, but you got to take into consideration that this is a game that came out in 2017.
Well, that's true, but I mean, we're basically looking at a game where we're seeing a lot of games that are being re-released on the Switch, and many developers are having a completely different experience. They're releasing a game on there, and they're seeing more sales on the Switch than anything else.
And there's probably more promotion behind that, which these guys didn't get.
But it's true. This is something we talked about a long time ago, I guess a month or two ago, when we were basically starting up the show for the first time. We discussed how indie games coming to the Switch were eventually going to have a clown door effect, right? You got everybody going through the door all at once.
I call it the Mr. Burns effect.
Yeah, the Mr. Burns effect. You're just going to have all that happen. Now, this is a clear identifier of this actually coming to fruition. Nintendo probably wanted to avoid this by having a better curation process with games, but now you're in a very sticky situation. Yesterday, we were talking about 3 games that look almost identical, right?
Yeah.
So there's 3 games that kind of play the same, kind of look the same, and that's going to cause a problem because it's going to be way too many games that the consumers don't really know which one is better.
Right.
Now, one has done better than the others. The other 2 are one is not out yet, and another one is also not out yet, but it's based upon a sequel of the game that many people didn't play the first one of, right?
These were all the Towerfall-like games that we were talking about. In case
Towerfall-like. We have now a new genre, right? So this is something that is going to be a bigger problem for Nintendo moving forward. Now, the reason we're bringing it up is because we think talking about this now and offering some solutions and ideas like that, it's a smarter move.
I want to talk a little bit about, like, we talked about one developer having one sort of issue, and there have been others, but I want to talk about sort of the grander problem that we may be seeing in the coming weeks, months, and years. So Nintendo, at their recent, the recent shareholders meeting, the former president, Tatsumi Kimishima, I got it, the ex-president of Nintendo had said, hey, we want to release 20 to 30 indie games every week on the Switch.
Yes.
Okay, this is a lot of games.
That's a mistake, too.
Well, a lot of games is great for people that want choice on systems, right? But when you start doing the numbers, it very quickly we see that the Mr. Burns effect can happen, from these releases. So 20 to 30 games a week means between 1,040 and 1,560 games a year. And if you look at the totality of the life of a console, which is about 5 years or so, you'd be looking between 5,200 and 7,800 indie games. That's a lot of games.
Yeah, it is.
Now,
and that can be a problem because the idea of keeping quality there. Now, Nintendo is known for quality control, right? This is something that they've been known for years by.
Specifically with their recipes, with their games, right? But we've never really seen a Nintendo console. There has been support for indie stuff with like the Wii and Wii U, but not on this grand scale.
Yeah, let's roll this back a little bit to way back in the day with the original NES. There was a high degree of watching over what games were released on the platform. The reason they did this, they had limited releases from companies, allowing them only to release maybe 1 or 2 games a year. And the reason they did this was because the Atari 2600 and the other video game systems that existed around that time period had tons and tons of shovelware. Nintendo wanted to focus on the quality, so that's where the Nintendo seal of approval came from. That's why that exists. Now, there are a lot of bad games on the NES, but I promise you, per game, there are more interesting, better games on the NES as an entire system than there is on systems that came out afterwards. Because the idea of quality control kind of fell under the radar the moment when Nintendo started to have competition on the scene. So they didn't really care too much about that when it came to the SNES. When it came to the Nintendo 64, they were in a hot fight with Sony, and they were losing that fight every single day.
Yeah, for the N64, it was less about quality control per se, but just like developers didn't really want to work with them because of the issues with the hardware itself. Yeah,
it was a lot of issues that happened through that, and Nintendo and developers have had this kind of love-hate relationship for years. Around the time that the GameCube happened, obvious problems with that. Around the time we got to the Wii, largely we view the Nintendo Wii as a success. However, what happened with the Nintendo Wii was it sold incredibly fast and then it stopped dead in its tracks. But while it was up there, a whole bunch of companies started releasing huge amounts of shovelware. I've had people talk to me about the Wii library. There are some really good games on the Wii library. Absolutely. There's a lot of games you can only have on the Wii system too. Unfortunately, though, the majority of that audience, the majority of what you have on the Wii are terrible, terrible games. It's just the way it is. There was just so many games released on the platform. Around the time that the Wii U came out, there's like no developers left that really wanted to have a slice of that pie.
Yeah, we got a few little indie darlings here or there on the Wii U. It's not to say that the landscape was completely barren, but we all know that the Wii U, it was a very low point in Nintendo's development history.
So what the problem I see with Nintendo is they either do too much or too little. They don't really follow a straight line when it comes to this stuff. And the Switch, in my opinion, right now, with the sheer amount of indie games that are coming out, and based upon the words we've just gotten from Z-Boy Games, right? Yeah. So now people are starting to have an issue. Now people are starting to have a problem. Right. And I think this is going to come to bite the Switch hard because this is way too much. This is, and I've wanted a lot of games, but I wanted a lot of specific games. I didn't want a lot of like a shotgun approach of just random stuff that not a lot of people care about.
If we want that, we can go directly to Steam and we can deal with that. So we view this as a bit of a problem, and we've seen developers coming out saying like, hey, they're not supporting us in the way that we want them to. But I want to talk a little bit about what you think Nintendo can do to fix this. I do have some ideas in mind. The word that I think both of us are going to be branching off of is curation. Yeah, curation is so important. If this is the move you're making, if we're going to be seeing like thousands of games by the end of your console life cycle that are independently created, how are these games being like thrown out to the people that would love to get them? Yeah, right.
So the way I see it, there's a couple solutions. One, right up the front. Now, everything I'm going to say is curation, okay? Everything is a part of that because I don't think there's any other solution outside of that.
Right now, all we know is that this is what they're doing, and we're going to be seeing hundreds upon hundreds of titles every year. So, like, okay, what are we doing to make things work?
So Nintendo just had a Direct, and another Direct prior to that, just a week prior, where it was just, they just called them Nindies, right? So Nintendo Indie Developed Games. Now, these are not directly Nintendo games. These are made by other companies, and they've been released on other platforms previously. By making a marketing tool like this huge Direct, where you're talking about all of these independent games, there's a good chance people are going to see those games and get them on other platforms, especially with the rise of systems like the Xbox One, where they're basically offering really cheap prices to getting into their systems. For instance, with their new system that their new, I guess, purchase plan they have, where it's like $26 a month or whatever it is, where you get an Xbox One, you get Games Pass, you get the Xbox Live platform, you might actually get some of these games in that package. So in order for Nintendo to avoid that, maybe what they do is they do Nindy Choice,
Nindy Selects.
Nindy Selects,
Yeah.
right? So let's just say there's maybe 4 or 5 games a month, maybe maybe that's a bit too much still, where they have unique games that come out, well, let's just say a year or two advance on the Switch, and they don't come out on any other platform. Now, I know that sounds a bit like, for gamers, that's not a great thing. We like the choice. We like being able to buy these on anything. But for Nintendo directly right now, these games need to be made in such a way where they feel like their properties owned by Nintendo or curated by Nintendo.
And it's not that egregious to say something like that. We have seen timed exclusivity with Street Fighter 4, I believe, or was it 5? One of the Street Fighter games, and as well as the Tomb Raider series had exclusivity with the Xbox for the second Tomb Raider game.
So I think a great way to do this basically is to just offer this game and then go, okay, maybe if it's not just that, we buy the rights to the game or work with the company directly so it becomes an exclusive, like, forever Switch game.
That's what I kind of want to see, is not just them saying like, no, we paid so that we have the timed exclusive, but to see them saying like, no, they're only releasing on our platform because they couldn't have made the game like this if it wasn't for us providing help.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like I want to see them working with people to make a better product.
Providing a little capital to get people to be developing on the Switch, I think, is a great idea.
I mean, that's how we got Bayonetta 2 on the Wii U, right?
Exactly. And indie developers are not making large-scale games. They're making much smaller games, a smaller team. So to have that kind of financial backing could push them through actually developing these games. Now, one thing to keep in mind that's sort of interesting to think about is the way that the Nintendo Switch is kind of positioned right now, where it's a portable system. A whole bunch of people can be looking at the system like it's an entry into not only portable gaming but console gaming at the same time, which is something that Sony can't offer and Microsoft can't offer right now. So it's a big deal for these developers to have that. And I feel realistically what we're looking at here is if they were to treat certain companies like, you know, like the Nindy companies, these companies could grow within Nintendo and be these like really interesting indie developers that Nintendo has worked with, and it'll create a better relationship with these companies where they might not want to jump over to another system, right? And that will help Nintendo out in the next generation when the Switch is never going to be as popular, or as powerful as the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox 2, whatever they may be. So having these games on the platform unique to this platform could really make a big deal
help.
next gen.
But again, though, what about that grander number? What do you think? Is there anything that they could do to curate 7,000 games by the end of a console lifespan? In my mind, like, I jump to other online services. I think of like Netflix. I think of like even like Steam, for example. And they do have ways to get media to people, and some are considered a bit egregious. Like Netflix, they tell you like, oh no, you like, they don't straight up tell you everything that's on the Netflix service immediately. They kind of show you based upon what you've already watched, like what you would like. So I was thinking having them implement something like that could be a move that they'd make. Whether or not I'd like that, I probably...
Well, you know, with their online service, right? So their online service has a package of these indie games coming out that get cycled out, maybe like 100, 200 games or something like that. Because if you're going to have this many games, that's probably a good idea. I think that's a good way to go about it. I really do. And every time somebody plays a specific game, that developer gets a little bit of money from the monthly, because it's not... It would focus people... See, this is the thing...
Kind of like PlayStation Plus was doing with their developers.
Exactly, because the idea is when it comes to Netflix and services like that, they don't really get paid per view. That's not really how that works. They get a license payment. So maybe Nintendo can work out a different kind of payment where if you make a game that's good enough and a lot of people are playing it on our online service, that keeps people like logged into the online service, wanting to pay for the online service, and we'll reward you financially for doing that.
And they should. If people are logging on to your service specifically because of a title, I mean, that title should see some sort of profit from it, especially if it's an independent developer. I feel. Basically,
what I'm seeing here is if Nintendo does move forward and start to release this many games that quickly, and they're all indie games, I hate to say this, they're going to kill the Switch. The reason being is that there's far too many games, and you can't focus on the quality when you have that much. This is just a repeat of what we saw with the Wii, right? And you can't have that happen again. It's a nightmare. There's great games on this platform, and I would argue many of the indie games they've been showing off have been really good games and fun ones, but you need to be able to allow the consumer to breathe. This is just science at this point. Think about it in terms of time equated for a gamer playing something, right? If a game takes, let's just say, 20 hours to beat, or whatever the amount of time it is, and you multiply that by 7,000, no gamer is going to be able to go out and buy those things. You're going to want these games coming in at a cheap price that are very easy to consume and very easy to enjoy, and basically do it in such a way that makes a lot of sense. 7,000 also causes a problem when it comes to downloadable games because the Switch simply doesn't have that much internal space. So you're causing a huge amount of problems because...
Yeah. And I'm thinking the bulk of these games are going to be downloadable.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah, right? This is basically a huge amount of problems that could exist today, or it could be fixed today. But the way I see it playing out, and this is the unfortunate way, I don't see them curating it because it's a very difficult proposition for them to do that. If they do curate it, they're going to make certain developers that are indie that they're working with right now very upset because they're going to feel excluded, which is just what happened to Zayboy, right? Zayboy did not get any announcement from Nintendo, so they're in the situation where they're like, hey, we made a game, it's on your platform, and what? How do you think the folks, Toby Fox feels with Undertale being shouted out for 2 seconds in the latest update? I mean, wouldn't he have gotten a bigger thing, considering how big that game is? There is this huge problem that's going to start creeping up on Nintendo, and the only reason they're doing this right now to the extent they're doing it is because indie games are cheap. They're easy to get out on the system right now, and they're far cheaper than working with larger third parties. But if you start to see a huge just cluster of all these games coming out, people are not going to be buying games nearly as much on the Switch. And if that happens, it's going to scare larger third parties from working on the Switch in the future, and they're going to move to platforms where they can see more of a premium experience. If the Switch gets marketed as the indie machine and not the premium machine, then kiss those developers that are making those bigger games goodbye, because they're going to move to Steam, they're going to move to Xbox, and they're definitely going to be moving to PlayStation.
So, like, one of the things that, like, this is like a heavy Nintendo leaning episode, but I do want to say that the PS4 and Xbox One, their indie push has also been suffering recently.
It
but
has
the reason why I feel like our talk today is so important is just because of the sheer quantity.
Yes.
Because for Xbox, they have about 500 indie games out. For the PS4, they have just over 900 indie games out. And this is over several years.
Yeah.
Right?
Let just so you guys know, because like we're video game reviewers, that's what we do. Today, I got about 7 or 8 emails about indie games. Today. That's just today. That's a normal. That is what we get every single day on the week. We will get a whole bunch of emails about unique new indie games. There's games that are fighting on Kickstarter. There's games that are fighting to get funding in a whole bunch of different sources. And the sheer amount of those games coming out is difficult for anyone to really go through.
Right.
So it's Nintendo's job, it's Microsoft's job, and it's Sony's job right now to basically go and pick out the ones they think are the best. And certain indie game developers, I would argue that for indie game developers, they need to start working as a team to make one project rather than kind of individually making 7,000 games.
Because we can bash Nintendo for not shouting out a single developer, but oh my gosh, it's an endless wave of, which is, from my perspective, like, man, I want to see people's creativity and I want to see these games, but at the same time, we're creating kind of a volatile sales place for consumers.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's a little worrisome.
We've been getting a whole bunch of games sent in for a whole bunch of different systems, but most recently Microsoft sent us a whole bunch of indie games, so I got to take a look at Flipping Death, a game I haven't heard much about from a whole bunch of people, because around the time that came out, there was like this just a bunch of other games were coming out. So Dead Cells is an amazing game. We're getting a lot of people talking about that, mostly because of the recent controversy around that.
Diving into that for just a second, I don't know that Dead Cells would have gotten all the acclaim that it would have without what had happened.
Without controversy, right? A lot of these game companies,
scary 'cause it's great.
It really is. There are. I honestly wish I could tell you about every single amazing game that we're getting in, and maybe that's worthy of its own show to talk about all these amazing indie games. But the factor is, if we were to talk about it this week and talk about all the amazing stuff that came in, next week there'd be a whole other range. And for that 1 week, that's the only time that game has to live.
And we're talking 20 to 30 games coming out on a platform. It's not that far away from what Steam does. Steam in a year, I think the sales for 2017 were over 7,600 titles. Yeah. And then if the Switch continues on its path to the 20 to 30 games with a 5-year life cycle, we're about 7,800. Which is true. Like, it's not nearly as big as what Steam does, but it's undeniably a lot of software.
A little while ago, I talked about the Nintendo Switch and how they needed to get more games on the platform. It was basically a fight for more games.
We're getting them.
And we're getting them. The problem is, it wasn't supposed to be this way when I discussed it. I was not talking about getting a whole bunch of indie games. Not that indie games are bad. Indie games are not a bad thing. They have the same credibility and can have the same enjoyment as larger third-party games, right?
Yeah.
The problem is, though, is that when I talked about getting a lot of games, it was getting a lot of games currently from third-party manufacturers and getting a couple of older ones moved forward. So we got Doom, we got Skyrim, so we got bigger games like that coming over to the platforms. But now what's happening is I really feel like you're seeing a big slowdown from Nintendo directly for making games on the platform, because I think they're just trying to catch up. The Switch was not something they were planning on doing this quick. It definitely was something that had to happen a lot faster. And I think when it comes to indie games here, they're just finding a successful way to get into it as quick as they can, but I think this is going to cause a problem.
I'm a little scared about the quality issues. Now, some people may argue that it's either you leave your door open for everyone to come in or you close it for everyone, but I don't think that's right either. I do believe there can be some sort of quality control there. I don't know exactly how it's going to work out, and I feel like if there isn't something like that implemented, some sort of section of the Switch, and not just this new Nindies channel, which I've checked out, it just kind of releases news and announcement. We need like a real sort of piece of that software to kind of like help you out in some way. Yeah. It's going to be an issue if they don't have something like that.
And basically, it's the consumer-focused stuff that's going to cause a problem. If you consider that a whole bunch of people buying the Nintendo Switch are used to buying games at $5 or maybe $10 a pop, and a big one comes out at like, you know, 50, 60, 70, 80 bucks, then suddenly they're not going to want to get those really big ones because they're getting a whole bunch of indie games that are at a smaller value.
Could be.
Which could shift the market, but see, that's the kind of concern that you have. Yeah. But folks, what do you think? Do you think this is going to be a big concern for the Switch moving forward, or do you believe that it's a really good idea for them to get as many games on the platform as possible? Let us know what you think.